Federalist 12, Part 3. Remember, Hamilton is bringing up the subject of revenue. How are we going to provide the government with money to run its business? And he has been talking about taxes, direct taxes and indirect taxes. And here he says that indirect taxes in the form of, let's say, taxes on imports would be the best way to go. So I'll continue. In America, it is evident that we must a long time depend for the means of revenue, chiefly on such duties. When it says such duties, he's talking about indirect taxes. In most parts of it, excises must be confined within a narrow compass. An excise is a form of tax too, okay? Like in the United States, when you buy a car, you pay an excise tax. It's a form of tax on certain items, okay? The genius of the people will ill brook the inquisitive and peremptory spirit of excise laws. The genius of the people. Remember, I said the word genius 2 centuries ago does not mean the same thing it does today. The word genius means the prevailing mood and understanding. What most of the people what will be acceptable to most of the people of a community, of a country. So he's saying that the prevailing mood, most of the American people will not like us to put an excise tax on too many things. That's why I recommend an indirect tax. So he says, the genius of the people will ill brook the inquisitive and peremptory spirit of the excise laws. The pockets of the farmer, on the other hand, will reluctantly yield but scanty supplies in the unwelcome shape of imposition on their houses and lands. Again, you cannot tax the farmer so much on their land and in their houses and what they have. And personal property is too precarious and invisible a fund to be laid hold of in any other way than by the imperceptible agency of taxes on consumption. If these remarks have any foundation, that state of things which will best enable us to improve and extend so valuable a resource must be the best adapted to our political welfare. And it cannot admit of a serious doubt that this state of things must rest on the basis of a general union. Again, the best thing to do is to stay united so that the taxes we impose on people is very little and we get enough revenue income from imports, taxes on imports, so that we can run one United States instead of 13 different countries. As far as this would be conducive to the interests of commerce, so far it must tend to the extension of the revenue to be drawn from that source. As far as it would contribute to rendering regulations for the collection of the duties more simple and efficacious, so far it must serve to answer the purpose of making the same rate of duties more productive and of putting it into the power of government to increase the rate without prejudice to trade. So if we set the rate of these import taxes uniformly, then people of different states will not be treated differently and unfairly. Now remember, I am reading it to you here sitting in front of the camera, not because I like to sit in front of the camera. It's just to remind you that even I have to look at this text and read it. It would make more sense to me. So please make sure that when you're listening to these, you have the book in front of you. If it is your first or second time you're reading this. Only after you get more comfortable with it, then I think listening to it will be sufficient. Only after you have read it once or twice. Okay, the next paragraph. The relative situation of these states, the number of rivers with which they are intersected, and of bays that wash their shores, the facility of communication in every direction, the affinity of language and manners, the familiar habits of intercourse. All these are circumstances that would conspire to render an illicit trade between them a matter of little difficulty, and would ensure frequent evasions of commercial regulations of each other. We are so next to each other, and we speak each other's language, and we know the rivers, so they can easily smuggle things from one state to another. If we don't put this tax on the imports, where we can actually keep track of it. But if they come inside and you decide to put the tax inside the state, people can easily smuggle them between the states, and the government will not have any revenue, will not be able to get any income. The separate states or confederacies would be necessitated by mutual jealousy to avoid the temptations to that kind of trade by lowness of their duties. The temper of our governments for a long time to come would not permit those rigorous precautions by which the European nations guard the avenues into their respective countries, as well by land as by water, and which even there are found insufficient obstacles to the adventurous stratagem of avarice. In France, there is an army of patrols, as they are called, constantly employed to secure her fiscal regulations against the inroads of dealers in contraband. Mr. Neckar computes the number of these patrols at upward of 20,000. Neckar was a director general of finances in France. He was known at the time to the founding fathers. He was really good at keeping track of what was going on in France financially. This proves the immense difficulty in preventing that species of traffic where there is an inland communication, and shows in a strong light the disadvantages with which the collection of duties in this country would be encumbered. If by disunion the states should be placed in a situation with respect to each other resembling that of France with respect to her neighbors. So if we stay disunited, we will be in a bad shape. The arbitrary and vexatious powers with which the patrols are necessarily armed would be intolerable in a free country. So if we were to put as many patrols to watch what is going on between the states and arm them, give them guns. We will need so many of them, and that will not be tolerated in a country like ours. In the states like ours, we're not used to seeing so many armed men playing patrols or playing like sheriffs and police. So he says that cannot even be done here. So the best thing for us to do is to stay united and have a uniform form of indirect tax in the form of a tax on imports.